The last thing I remember thinking before I passed out in the hospital waiting room was that I hadn't eaten since Tuesday. Not because I forgot. Not because I was too busy. Because I had $47 in my checking account, and my rent was due in 4 days. And I was doing the kind of math that only people who've been financially gutted can understand, the kind where you weigh a granola bar against a bus fare and the granola bar loses. I was 32 years old. I had a master's degree in accounting. I had spent the last 8 years of my life making sure everyone around me was okay. And I was sitting on a plastic chair in a hospital hallway. Alone. Because my family had better things to do. Let me back up. My name is Lauren. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. The oldest of 3. My brother is 4 years younger than me. My sister is 7 years younger. My parents always said I was the responsible one, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it was never meant as one. It was an assignment. I got my first job at 16, a grocery store 2 miles from the house. I paid for my own clothes, my own school supplies, my own everything. My parents weren't cruel. They weren't monsters. They were just people who had figured out very early that I would handle things, so they stopped needing to. When I got a full academic scholarship to Ohio State, my mother cried. Not with pride, with relief. One less thing, she said, and I told myself she didn't mean it the way it sounded. My brother, Marcus, was a different story. He was funny and charming and everyone's favorite, including mine, for a long time. He was also completely directionless. When he graduated high school 2 years after me, he had no plans, no savings, no scholarship. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that they couldn't afford to send him to college. They weren't asking me directly, they were just explaining. But the silence after the explanation was very loud. I was 22. I had just started my first real job at an accounting firm in Columbus, making $41,000 a year. I said I would help. That was my first mistake, not saying yes. But saying yes without a number attached. Without a timeline. Without any of the structure I would have demanded in a professional contract. I just said yes, because he was my brother, and because my parents looked so tired, and because I had always been the one who handled things. I paid Marcus's tuition for 4 years, $14,000 a year at a state school, plus another $3,000 a year toward his housing, $68,000 total. He graduated with a communications degree and immediately decided he wanted to go to graduate school for business. My parents called me that same night. It's just 2 more years, my mother said. You know how much this means to him, my father said. You've always been so good at this, sweetheart. Good at what, exactly? I never asked. I was 26. I had been dating a man named Derek for 2 years, and we had just started talking about moving in together. I remember telling him about the graduate school conversation and watching his face do something complicated. He didn't say anything. He should have. I should have listened to his silence the way I had taught myself to listen to my parents. I said yes again. Graduate school was $22,000 a year for 2 years. I also started sending my parents $1,800 a month around this time because my father's hours at his warehouse job had been cut, and my mother's knee was bad, and the mortgage was behind. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things. Derek left after 14 months. He didn't give me a long speech about it. He just said, very quietly, I feel like I'm always 4th on your list, Lauren. I didn't argue with him because I knew he was right. By the time Marcus finished his MBA, I had given my family between tuition, housing supplements, and the monthly transfers to my parents just over $190,000. I was 28 years old. I had $11,000 in savings, a studio apartment I could barely afford, and a title at work that hadn't moved in 3 years because I kept turning down projects that would require travel or extra hours, because my parents needed me available. Marcus got a job at a marketing firm in Chicago and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment he found on a weekend trip. He sent me a photo of the skyline view from his living room. Made it, he wrote. Just those 2 words. Not even an acknowledgement. Just made it, as if he had done it alone. I stared at that text for a long time. I didn't say anything. That was my second mistake. My sister, Brooke, was studying nursing on a partial scholarship, and I was covering the gap about $600 a month. She was at least grateful. She called me every Sunday, and she meant it when she said she was grateful. Of all of them, Brooke was the one I never questioned. But even with her, I had never once said out loud what I needed. I had never given anyone in my family the chance to show up for me because I had never stepped aside long enough to need showing up for. Until the September I turned 32, when everything came apart at once. The layoff came on a Tuesday. My firm had been acquired, and the new parent company had their own accounting team. 43 people let go in one afternoon. I was given 6 weeks of severance, a cardboard box, and a handshake from an HR director whose name I had never learned. I drove home in a kind of numb silence. I had $23,000 in savings, more than I'd ever had, because I had finally, in the past 2 years, started keeping more of what I earned. I had skills. I had a strong resume. I told myself it would be okay. Then, 3 weeks later, I found the lump. It was small. My doctor found it during a routine exam I had almost canceled because I didn't want to pay the copay while I was unemployed. She referred me to a specialist immediately. The specialist ordered a biopsy. The biopsy came back with results that required more tests. Nobody was saying the word yet, but the way they were all looking at me said everything. I sat in my car in the parking garage after the second appointment, and I called my mother. I told her everything: the layoff, the tests, the fact that I didn't know what came next, but that I was scared, and I was alone, and I could really use someone to come stay with me for a week while I figured it out. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Lauren, I can't just leave your father. You know how he is when I'm not home." I said I understood. She said, "You've always been so strong. You'll be fine." And then she told me that Marcus was coming home for Thanksgiving and they were redoing the guest room, and she had a lot to do. She said she'd call me later that week. She did not call me later that week. I called Marcus that same night. He was at a work event. I could hear music and glasses in the background. I told him what was going on. I asked if there was any way he could come to Columbus, even just for a long weekend, just so I wasn't sitting alone waiting for test results in an apartment that felt like it was closing in on me. He said, "Lauren, I just got this job. I can't take time off right now." I said, "Marcus, I paid for you to get that job." The silence that followed was very different from any silence I had heard from him before. He said, "That was your choice." I sat with that sentence for the rest of the night. Your choice. 8 years, $190,000, my relationship, 3 promotions I had turned down, and it was my choice. Something I did for myself, apparently, not for him. I was a stranger who had randomly decided to fund someone else's life for nearly a decade, and in the retelling of his own story, that stranger didn't even get a name. I called Brooke the next morning. She was the one who cried. She was in the middle of her final clinical rotation and couldn't leave, but she stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours. She asked the right questions. She looked up what the specialist had said and explained what the terminology actually meant. She was 3 states away, and she was the most present person in my life, which told me something I should have known for years. The week I was waiting for my final results was the longest week of my life. I was job hunting between appointments, trying not to spend my savings, trying not to catastrophize. My mother texted once to ask if I had heard anything. My father called on a Wednesday evening, and for a moment I thought maybe he was calling because he was worried about me. But he called to ask if I could float them $2,000 because the heating system was acting up. He said he'd pay me back in the spring. I looked at my phone for a long time after the call ended. Then I went into my bank account and canceled the automatic monthly transfer to my parents. I had set it up so long ago that canceling it felt like turning off a light in a room I had forgotten was on. I canceled it on a Thursday night, sitting on the floor of my kitchen, eating crackers because I hadn't gotten around to grocery shopping. I thought I would feel guilty. I felt nothing. 3 days later, my doctor called with the full results. The mass was benign, something that needed to be monitored, something that required a follow-up in 6 months, but not the thing I had been rehearsing how to survive. I sat on my kitchen floor again, and I cried until I couldn't anymore, and then I called Brooke, and she cried too, and then she said, very carefully, "Lauren, what are you going to do now?" I didn't have an answer. The answer arrived in the form of a voicemail I almost deleted. Her name was Diane. She had been the CFO at my firm for the 6 years before the acquisition, my mentor, the person who had looked at a 26-year-old junior accountant and seen something worth investing in. We had stayed in touch loosely after she retired 2 years ago. Birthday texts, the occasional coffee when she was in town. Her voicemail said she had heard about the acquisition. She said she was sorry. She said she was working on something new and she wanted to talk, if I was open to it. I called her back within the hour. We met at a coffee shop near her house in Dublin, a suburb 20 minutes outside Columbus. She looked the same as she always had, small, precise, with the kind of steady attention that made you feel like the only person in the room. She ordered tea. I ordered coffee. She looked at me across the table and said, "How are you actually doing?" I told her the truth, all of it. The layoff and the medical scare and my family and the cancelled transfer. I don't know why I told her everything. I had never been that honest with anyone, not even Derek. Maybe because I was tired. Maybe because benign results have a way of breaking something loose in you. Something that had been held very tight for a very long time. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. How much of your professional stagnation was self-imposed?" I opened my mouth. She held up one hand. "Think," she said. I thought about it. I thought about the Chicago project I had turned down when I was 27, the one that would have put me in a director-track conversation within 18 months. I thought about the San Francisco role I had declined at 29 because my parents needed me nearby. I thought about every decision I had made professionally through the lens of what my family needed me to be: available, consistent, never too far, never too occupied. "Most of it," I said. She nodded like she had expected that answer. She was building a boutique financial consulting firm. She had 2 clients already and room for a third. She wanted a director of client accounts, someone she trusted completely, someone with a depth of experience that a younger hire couldn't offer. She slid a piece of paper across the table. The number on it was $94,000 base plus equity. I looked at it for a long time. "That's not an offer yet," she said. "That's a conversation. But I wanted you to see it before we started the conversation, because I know how you negotiate. You always start lower than you should." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had produced in about 3 weeks. I said yes, this time with a number attached. With a start date and a title and a contract I read in its entirety before I signed. My mother called that same week. Not about the job, she didn't know about the job yet. She called because the first month's automatic transfer had not arrived. She was calm at first, assuming it was a bank error. I told her it wasn't. I told her I had cancelled it. The calmness ended. She went through several stages very quickly. Confusion, then hurt, then something that curdled into anger. She said I was punishing them for something. I said I wasn't. She said I was being selfish. I asked her, and this was the first time I had ever asked it out loud, whether she remembered the week I was waiting for my biopsy results. Whether she had thought about coming to Columbus? The pause that followed told me everything. She said she had meant to, that things had been busy, that she had prayed for me. I told her I appreciated the prayers. I told her that I also needed something she hadn't been willing to give me, and that I needed to think carefully about what our relationship looked like going forward. I told her I loved her. I told her I would be in touch, but that the monthly transfers were done. She said I would regret it. She said I would need them someday and then I would understand. I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in my studio apartment, sitting on the kitchen floor eating crackers, waiting for a phone call that I had spent 2 weeks rehearsing how to receive. I thought about the guest room they were redecorating for Marcus's Thanksgiving visit. "I hope you're right," I said. "I hope that someday I need something and you're able to give it. I would really like that." I meant it. I still mean it. My father called 2 days later. My father, who I can count on one hand the number of times he has called me first in 32 years. He was less volatile than my mother and more confused. He said he didn't understand what had changed. I told him nothing had changed. That's the thing I needed him to hear. Nothing had changed for years and years. I had just finally stopped pretending that was okay. He said, "We always thought you were happy to help." "I know," I said. "That's on me too." Marcus texted, not called. He said he heard I'd stopped the transfers and that it was affecting Mom and Dad, and he thought I was being dramatic. I put my phone face down on the counter and left it there for 6 hours. When I picked it back up, I typed out a very long response, then deleted it, then typed 2 sentences. I paid for your education and your graduate degree. I never once asked for anything in return. I'm asking now for you to stay out of this. I hit send. He didn't respond. 4 months later, through Brooke, I learned that Marcus's marketing firm had done a round of layoffs and he was let go. I learned that he had gone home to stay with my parents for a while, and that the experience of being unemployed and living in the house he'd grown up in had apparently been Brooke's word illuminating. She said he had asked about me. I noted that information. I didn't do anything with it yet. Diane's firm opened its 3rd account in February. By March we had a 4th. I was doing work I had been capable of doing for 5 years, in an environment where my capabilities were the point rather than an inconvenience. I worked hard. I kept every commitment. I left early when I needed to, and stayed late when the work required it, and nobody made me feel guilty for either. I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood I had always liked but thought I couldn't afford. I set it up slowly, buying one thing at a time, and the process of choosing what went in each room felt enormously significant in a way I couldn't fully explain. Every piece of furniture was mine. Every decision was mine. Nobody needed me to make the bed a certain way or keep the refrigerator stocked with things I didn't eat. Brooke visited in April, her first weekend free, after finishing her nursing boards. She walked through my apartment and stood at the window in the 2nd bedroom and looked out at the street for a long time. Then she turned around and said, "This looks like you." I didn't know exactly what she meant, but I understood it completely. She told me that Thanksgiving had been strange, that Marcus had spent most of it quiet, that my mother had mentioned me 3 times and looked at her phone each time, as if waiting for something, that my father had built shelves in the garage and seemed to be working through something physical and private. I asked Brooke how she was doing. She said she was okay. I asked if she needed anything. She said she didn't, but she appreciated being asked. I told her I was sorry it had taken me this long to ask. She said, "You were always asking. You just forgot to ask yourself." I had been working with Diane for about 7 months when she called me into her office, which was actually a corner of her guest room she had converted, and mine was actually the 2nd bedroom of my apartment, which I had decided to use as a home office 2 days a week. We did everything over video calls and the occasional in-person meeting at a coffee shop. It worked. She said she had spoken to one of our clients about potentially bringing me on as an executive advisor at a retainer rate, in addition to my salary. She wanted to know if I was interested. I asked what the retainer looked like. She told me. I thought about the first time my parents had sat me down at the kitchen table and explained that Marcus needed college. I thought about 22-year-old me, who had just started earning real money for the first time and immediately started directing it away from herself. I thought about every year between then and now. "Yes," I said. "I'm interested." Marcus called me in October. A real call, not a text. I almost didn't pick up, then I did. He sounded different, or maybe I just heard him differently, now that I wasn't operating from the posture of someone who owed him something. He said he had been thinking about what I'd said in the text I sent him. He said he was sorry. Not a rehearsed sorry, not the kind that comes with a built-in, but just the word, sitting there on its own, waiting to see what I did with it. I said, "I know." He said he didn't understand, when he was in school, where the money came from, that he had understood it abstractly, but hadn't let himself think about what it actually meant, what it cost me. He said that being unemployed and living back at home for 3 months had made him think about things he had been deliberately not thinking about. I said, "I believe you." He said, "I want to be better. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I want to try." I told him what it would need to look like. Not dramatically. Not with a list of demands, just clearly. The way I had learned to be clear about things I needed from people. I told him I needed him to be someone I could call when things were hard. I told him I needed him to stop treating our parents' financial problems as my responsibility to solve. I told him that if he wanted to be in my life, he had to be in it, not just available when it was convenient, not just present during holidays. He said he understood. I said, "We'll see." That's not cruelty. That's just the difference between believing someone's intentions and trusting their follow-through. I had spent 32 years extending both at the same time, to people who had only earned one. I was done conflating them. My mother and I spoke in November, the first real conversation we'd had since the one about the canceled transfers. She didn't apologize directly, which surprised me less than it used to. What she said was that she missed me, that she thought about the biopsy week and felt bad about how she had handled it. She didn't say the word sorry, but there was something in her voice that I recognized, something effortful, something that was costing her to say. I told her I missed her too. I told her that I wanted a relationship with her that was honest, that I needed her to see me as a person, not a resource, that I knew she loved me. I had never doubted that, but that love without presence had been very hard to hold on to. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know you felt that way." I thought about every way I might respond to that. We are not healed. That would be too clean, too fast, too much like the end of a story that is still very much in progress. We talk every couple of weeks now. She asks about work. I tell her. She doesn't ask about money, and I don't offer it. And somehow the absence of that transaction has made the conversations easier than they've been in years. There's less weight to it. We're figuring out what's left when you take the obligation out. My father sent me a card at Christmas, handwritten, which was unexpected. He said he was proud of me. He said he didn't say it enough. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking about the kind of father he had been. The card was 4 sentences long, and it was the most honest thing he had ever sent me. I kept it. What I know now, that I didn't know at 22. Generosity is only generosity when it's freely given. What I was doing wasn't generosity. It was a performance of belonging, a way of buying proof that I mattered to people who had taught me, very early and very subtly, that I had to earn my place with them. Every transfer, every yes, every night, I stayed in Columbus instead of taking an opportunity it was payment on a debt that had never actually existed. You can spend years paying off something that was never owed. You can be very responsible and very capable and very present for everyone around you, and never once ask whether they are being responsible, capable, or present for you. You can be the person who handles things until handling things is all you are. I am something else now. I have a job. I'm good at that also. Finally. Pays me what I'm worth. I have a 2-bedroom apartment where the second bedroom is used sometimes as an office and sometimes as a guest room when Brooke visits. I have a mentor who treats my judgment as an asset. I have a brother who is, slowly and imperfectly, trying to become someone I can call. I am not someone who would recognize in herself all the ways she had been disappearing. That took losing almost everything: the job, the false safety of the transfers, the weeks of sitting alone with a diagnosis I hadn't gotten yet to see clearly. But I see it now. On the 1st of every month, I make one automatic transfer into my own savings account. For the first time in 8 years, the money I earn in January is still mine in February. The concept still surprises me, a little. I think it will for a while. Last week, Diane and I were wrapping up a call with a new client, and after the client hung up, she said quietly, "The way she says the things that matter, you're different from when I hired you. You take up more space." I thought about that on the drive home. Taking up space. All those years of making myself smaller financially, professionally, personally, so that everyone else had enough room. All those years of being so careful not to need too much, ask for too much, want too much. I got home and unlocked my door and stood in my own apartment in the November dark, and I thought, yes, I am taking up more space. It turns out there was plenty of room for me all along. I just had to stop giving it away. If you've ever been the one who handles things, if you've sat with your phone in your hand wondering why the person you'd do anything for can't seem to make one phone call, I want you to hear this. The problem was never that you were too much. The problem was that you taught them you were fine with too little. You are not too much, and you deserve people who, when your world gets quiet and scary and uncertain, show up without being asked. Drop a comment if this story stayed with you. I'd love to know where you're watching from.